everyone. I'm just here. I'm Mary Halpin Carter, and I'm the head of school at St. Luke's School. And we are delighted to be putting on this event with the New Canaan Public Library. How gorgeous is this place? Pretty fantastic, right? The work of so many staff members and incredible volunteers, including many St. Luke's alumni parents who worked so hard on this project. And that's the link as I introduce Conor Grennan, who is a St. Luke's parent, and we're, as well as an expert in AI. We're so excited to have him here tonight. He did a phenomenal job helping our faculty and staff as they're adapting and adjusting and embracing AI moving forward. And then my wonderful colleague, Abby Abbott, who is the assistant director of the upper school. You may have heard Liz Perry was coming. Abby is her understudy due to illness. So way to go, Abby. Right, her dream. So they are going to introduce themselves to you, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Mary. Good evening. I'm Abby Abbott, assistant head of the upper school at St. Luke's, right down the road. Thank you so much to the New Canaan Library for hosting this really cool event. I'm really looking forward to interviewing Conor Grennan about how artificial intelligence is shaping our world. I know we're going to learn a lot tonight, so buckle up. In all honesty, when I first heard about ChatGPT, my reaction was, this is the end of student thinking. This is the end of student writing. This is the end. Intellectual apocalypse now. How do we protect our students from this menace? Obviously I'm sitting here with Conor. My perspective has shifted quite a bit. Spoiler alert, I'm in the middle of writing my own 9th grade ancient history textbook with the help of ChatGPT. I get instant feedback on lesson plans, how to differentiate instruction, which is especially important for our students with learning differences. I put new school policy through ChatGPT to get edits and help with grammar. And on a personal note, I have a 4-year-old who loves squids, colossal squids. And I don't know about you, but I do not have the bandwidth after a long day of work to generate an original story about colossal squids who lose their mom in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean called the Midnight Zone, not the Twilight Zone, after a long day of work. So ChatGPT helps me generate original stories about squids for my kids. So one of the people that helped me really shift my perspective from a doom and gloom state of mind to a more playful approach is Conor. And learning more about his work with ChatGPT and generative AI at Stern, and how he encourages his faculty at NYU to use this incredibly creative tool in the classroom. At St. Luke's, we've adopted really 2 big approaches to AI in our school. Prevention of the bad stuff, the no more student thinking stuff, and also exploration of the good stuff. So at St. Luke's, we are focused on prevention and exploration. We've revised our policies in light of AI for students and faculty. We've created guidelines for ethical use, and we've done a bunch of professional development to skill up our teachers so they're ready to use this as a tool instead of run and hide from it. We've also made adjustments like adding a second round of parent-teacher conferences, because one thing AI can never replace is human connection and human relationships. So even as we lean into tech, we're also doubling down on the human-centered parts of school, the best parts of school. So we're using a both-and approach. And Conor, tonight, one thing I'm really excited to talk to you about is that both-and, that balance. How do we live a life that embraces this new technology while staying deeply centered in that human connection piece? And you and I got to know each other last year as #1 middle school volleyball fans. Conor as a parent and me as a coach. And this year, I have your son in my ancient history class. But what we're here to talk about tonight is much more connected to your professional role as Dean of Students at New York University's Stern School of Business and the leader of generative AI at Stern. So Conor, Let me start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your role at Stern and what got you into AI in the first place.
How's that? Oh my gosh, I sound amazing. Thank you. So again, I'm Conor Grennan. We have my wife Liz is working right now. My son is at a soccer game. Where in Hopkins? Is it in Hopkins? My daughter's at volleyball. So otherwise, I do have a loving family that would otherwise be front row. So I'm the Dean of Students for the MBA program at NYU Stern, obviously in New York. But the way I got into AI, and I hope this encourages people. I have no technical background. My background is a writer. I am a writer, and when my wife met me, she met me in Nepal. I was taking care of orphans. So that's about as little technical background as you can possibly get. That's me. So in case you think, oh, well, AI is for technical people, it is not. And I'm just going to say this to you good people, I don't tend to announce this because this is part of my job and you never want to admit that, you may not be good at your job. But here's how I got into the AI space. It was early this year, and my wife Liz is at McKinsey & Company, the consulting company. And she had been doing AI for a couple of years now, and she was a former lawyer. And so she does what they call responsible AI, which is making sure that AI is in line, the way it works is in line with our values as humans. And ChatGPT came on the scene, and she said to me, hey, have you seen this? And I'm like, no, I haven't seen it. And again, this is months ago. So you think of somebody who would be up here, portrayed as an expert, would be doing something for years. Months ago, I learned about all this. And she said, you should really look at this because I think it's really going to disrupt a lot of things, including education, probably at the forefront of all those things. So I did, and I started messing around with it. And if you haven't used ChatGPT, it essentially looks like Google, right? I mean, if you know what Google looks like, it doesn't really say anything. It's just like a box. And you're like, well, what should I type into this box? And so I was like, well, I didn't really know. So the first thing I typed in was, write me a poem about, butterflies. And it's like, brrr, and it wrote the most amazing poem about butterflies I'd ever seen. I was like, that was weird. And so I thought, well, let's up the ante. I was like, so my daughter Lucy's in 7th grade, and she's like, tell her to write about vampire butterflies on the moon. I'm like, okay. So then it wrote about, rhyming everything. So after just a few minutes, I was like, well, if it can do that, I was like, explain string theory to me. So it did that. I'm like, okay, explain string theory to me as if I was 12. It did that. And I said, explain string theory to me using the analogy of balloon animals. It did that. And I'm not saying it does it instantly. So if you haven't used it, it's one of these things that's so mind-bending. So to answer your question how I got into it, I was completely floored. And so, and I'll go on a little bit because I think it's relevant. So I was like, okay, we have to do something here because first of all, our MBA students who are about 28 years old really need to know this because it's going to change everything. And also our faculty needs to know it because probably at this moment, the students are all getting assigned papers like, hey, maybe not in the MBA program, but in high school, write a 5-page paper about Hamlet. And you can just say to ChatGPT, write me a 5-page paper about Hamlet. And before it writes faster than you can read the paper, and it gives you a 5-page paper about Hamlet. So I was like, this is trouble. Kind of like how you started, right? So I decided, and I'll only take another minute because I'm not that into origin stories, but I think it's interesting enough, is that I was like, okay, let me create a program by which I can teach our students, but I have to learn this. So I learned it, and when we say, I'm going to sort of define terms because sometimes people don't define terms. So when we say generative AI, AI is obviously artificial intelligence. Generative AI is really the new thing, and generative AI just means things that can create text, like ChatGPT is generative AI. Or when you see fake images, like Donald Trump getting carted away and hanged, those kinds of things, that's also generative AI. It just means AI that has been, generating, it sort of generates something new. So that when we say generative AI, that's what we're talking about. So I was like, okay, so we got to figure this out. So I started teaching the students, and I started reaching out to heads of companies in New York, big financial firms, big, huge firms, and saying, hey, this is a huge tech. What are you guys doing to, use this to change your workforce? And they all said, and this is just a few months ago, they're like, well, we're not really using it. And I was like, oh, wow. So lest you think that you're like really behind, everybody is behind, everybody. So don't think like, oh, I'm so behind. You're not. But so what happened was that they then asked me, well, could you come and teach us how to do? So that's how I started sort of working with companies and going out and actually training companies in how to use generative AI. So sorry, that was a little bit of a long origin story, but it's just worth it. The take-home point here is that I didn't know what this thing was back in like January, literally. And now here I am on stage talking about it. That's how quickly you can go from not knowing anything to becoming an absolute expert in it.
So because this tool is so new and cutting edge, my guess is there are a lot of misconceptions about it. In your mind, what is the biggest thing people get wrong about AI?
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, because I'd love to hear like, your questions about sort of like where you are, because everybody's going to be at a really different spot around this. So I'm just kind of guessing what some of the misconceptions are. They're the misconceptions that I've heard. So one is that it's going to destroy humanity. So fingers crossed it doesn't. I can't say for sure, but I will say that having studied this a lot, I don't think it's going to destroy humanity. So let's start there. I guess number two is that, one of the reasons that people don't really, always use it is they think it's like techie, right? Like you have to be something, kind of technical. Which makes sense because every tech in the history of tech has been techie, right? I mean, in history, anything that you've ever had to do that even seemed a little bit technical, believe me, my kids, I don't know what stage you guys reached when you reached this. For me, it was probably 2 years ago that I was trying to fix something and my son's like, just give it to me. This whole moment where like your kids know more than you, I'm like, well, there goes that life, So anyway, so that happens very quickly. But here's the thing about this. Not only do you not have to be, well, think about how techie you have to be to use Google, right? It's exactly that techie. You have to be that techie to use the same level of techiness. I'm saying techie a lot, but here's the point. When you use this thing, if I'll have people in a room and some of them are like technical experts, and then I have other people in the room and they've literally never used it before, but they're sort of creative or intellectually curious or something like that. I would venture to say that at the end of the day, the non-tech people will be using it better than the tech people. That's not an exaggeration because again, all it takes is your ability to use Google and that's the level. Wait, well, let me first, can I just kind of ask you, is that your experience as well so that they don't think it's just me saying this?
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that really helped shift my thinking more in that direction is your point. Conor came and talked to the faculty last August, so not very long ago, and one of your big points was talk to the chatbot as if it were human. So if you can formulate a question, if you can have a conversation with another human, you can use this and you can use it as a powerful tool. So in terms of ease of access, in terms of getting up to speed very quickly, I'm hard pressed to think of another tech tool that has that quick of a learning curve.
Yeah, and then you could even argue that there is no learning curve, right? I mean, to your point, the single best thing you can do, and I really encourage you all, if you haven't tried something like ChatGPT, start with ChatGPT. Don't worry about anything else we're going to say tonight. You can just Google ChatGPT, try it, and just talk to it as if you're talking to a person. Now, that's hard, right? So why is that hard? Why doesn't, if you're able to talk to it like a human, why aren't we all just using it? Well, here's the reason. The reason is it doesn't look like a human. And the brain doesn't really let us talk to it like a human because in the same way that you might say, hey, talk to this baby like a college professor all day, try that, like that will last for, a few minutes. You'd be like, hello, Professor, Schmiggles or whatever, and then, you might say, oh, you're whatever. And after a few minutes, you'll start talking to your baby like a baby because, you're not a sociopath, right? So why is that? It's because your brain does a few things really well, right? It like automates things, it predicts things, it processes. And when it sees a baby, it knows you don't have to think, you're just going to talk to it like a baby. ChatGPT looks like your laptop, so you're going to talk to it like a machine, and you're really going to talk to it like Google because it looks exactly like Google, so people treat it like Google. So I would say in terms of other misconceptions, you may have heard that you can't really trust it, right? You can't really trust it because it gives you false information. In the business, they call that hallucinations. They say it hallucinates. And a couple of things about that. Number one, it hallucinates a lot less than people think, especially because there's even news out today that it's getting better and better because it's all connected to the internet. It's just getting very, very good at not hallucinating. It does sometimes, but the early days where that really made big news, people said, well, I'm not, really going to use it. That's another big misconception. And I'll say just the other misconception because I saw it in a statistic recently. Of course, because it's technology, younger people are going to crush us on this, right? We know that. We've ceded, the planet to them. Like, we're good. But in this case, I'll just say this: the reasons why sort of we in the older generation aren't using it is because it's something like 40% or something don't really see any value in it. And that's the really interesting thing. And that's what, we'll sort of talk about probably a little bit tonight. Like, what do you actually use it for? When I first started using it, when my wife Liz said, hey, you should try this thing. And I was like, well, are you using it? She's like, yeah, I'm using it like 30 times a day. And I'm like, for what? Like, what are you using it for? This thing that you can talk to and it will talk back? Like, what? And now I use it like 50 times a day. And people say, like, for what? And it's almost easier to sort of, well, we can kind of get to that. I want to sort of stay for a second on just like other misconceptions. But, again, when we have time for some questions and everything else, by all means, like, tell me your misconceptions and we can. By the way, if you guys are standing in the back and you want to sit, everybody's gonna wave you in and say, come sit. No reason to stand unless you want to stand next to the cheese, which I also totally get. Anyway.
Conor, you obviously work in higher ed, and I'm wondering, in your conversations with other universities, what are other universities doing? How are they using it? Are they adapting, or are they choosing to put their head in the sand and ignore this?
This is such a good question. This is why I was really taken aback. So our two kids are at St. Luke's, and when St. Luke said, "Hey, would you, we've been talking since the spring, I think," and said, "Oh, will you, kind of come in and talk about it?" And I talked to St. Luke's about it, and I was just really genuinely like blown away as how progressive everybody was. Like, yeah, let's use this. We're already using it like this. We're using it like this, and I'd love to hear some of the way that you're using it, Abby, as well. Like, in terms of, and we were talking about it a little bit before in terms of creating lesson plans and things like that. But I would say generally in academia, it's hard, right? And I think it's hard because even when you talk about like a company's not like a big giant robot. A company is made up of individuals in the same way academia. I don't know if anybody comes from academia. I grew up as the child of college professors, so I know this. College professors, who I work with, they've been teaching something in the same way for 25 years sometimes, and it's worked really, really well. Like, to say then, okay, you're going to have to change that, because then they would say, well, why would I have to change assigning my 10-page Hamlet paper to take home? And the reason is because your student can go and just literally go to ChatGPT and say, hey, can you write me a 10-page paper about Hamlet? And it will write it, and it will look unbelievable. And also, this is very important, there's no way to detect it. Now, I don't say that around kids because, I always say, like, my kids will be like, well, I heard there's an AI detector. I'm like, oh yeah, this thing will catch you. It's going to bust you. It makes you sort of like walk around, just in your underwear around school. It's like really bad. It's like huge punishments around this. The truth is, just for us, anybody? Okay, anyway, the truth is there's no AI detector. It doesn't work. In fact, OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT, stopped its AI detector. And they had $1 billion to spend on this. And they're like, it doesn't work because it gives you a different answer every time. And I'll say one other thing about the human thing. Even in the early days, before it got this advanced, early days, I mean like May, but like the early days of this, the New York Times, maybe you saw this, did a sort of test, and they tested it saying, and they said, write a paper from a fourth grader, and they actually asked a fourth grader to write a paper, and then they asked ChatGPT to write a paper as a fourth grader, and then they did the same thing with ninth grade, and then PhD level, and they actually gave those to professors and teachers and said, which one is ChatGPT and which one is the real person? And there was no way to tell. It was a complete coin flip. And so I know it kind of sounds like I'm exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. This thing sounds exactly like a human. It talks exactly like a human. We can talk about why that is, But the point is that it does. Yeah.
So you have a 3-part framework for helping universities and corporations think about how to start using ChatGPT or similar tools. Can you tell us a little bit about that framework?
Yeah, so it's very simple, kind of almost deceptively simple framework, because when I'll go into places, people will sort of say, how do we use it? Where do we start? Like what, and maybe some of you have the same question. I know I did, which is when I was asking my wife, like, how do you use it? Where do you start? What's the first thing that you ask? I mean, I could get to write, poetry in the style of a sonnet all day long. You can do that, of course, but at some point that's not super valuable unless, I guess, you're a poet. But here's the thing, like when you're thinking about how to use it, you already have Google, and Google's great. Google still works. This is not sort of the end of Google. So how do we use it? So I'll tell you kind of like how I got to the framework, because I think it's partially, it might be interesting. I'm not sure. We're going to find out if people start nodding off, like just tell me, Abby. But so I started kind of to pick up the story where I left off earlier. I started going into these really mega companies and teaching the C-suite, teaching CEOs, like, coaching them for like an hour. And after an hour, they'd be like, holy cow, this thing's incredibly powerful. It's going to change everything. And I'll go through some kind of examples about why and what it does. But for example, it will just say, okay, sort of like, read this you can tell ChatGPT, read this entire research paper and give me 5 insights. And within, 10 seconds, it will have done that. It's like, okay, now take those insights and create sort of an email to my boss saying why we should implement this new plan. And it'll do that. It's like, okay, now create a whole learning curriculum for our whole company. And I'm talking about seconds. It can do all of these things, right? Then write a job description for 6 more people, because I do this sometimes. Write a job description for 6 people in my company. And, write an email to my boss explaining why we need it. And it will do that in seconds, and it's the most persuasive email to your boss you've ever seen, why you need 6 more people on your team. It doesn't know who you are, who your boss is, what your industry is, who you need the people for. It doesn't know anything, and I'm like, we gotta hire 6 more people. It's that persuasive. So even if you give it a little information, it really does that. And then you say, write job descriptions, et cetera. So anyway, so going back, I'm training these C-suite level people. And after about an hour, they would say, this was going to change everything. And I was like, Conor, you are the greatest teacher in the history of teaching. And I would walk away just so proud of myself. And then I would check back in with them about a week later and find that they weren't really using it. I was like, okay, so clearly I'm like a really, really bad teacher, but I didn't know why I was a bad teacher. And so I started kind of re-examining how I was teaching it. And here's the mistake I was making, and this goes into the framework. I was making the mistake of teaching people the tool. And you think of course. But this is not like any other tool you've ever seen in your life. It's wildly different. There's nothing that you need to know. Think about that. Almost anything, you need to know something. If you're teaching, French or calculus or Excel or something, you need to build things, that. This, all you need to know is how to speak like a human. I'm not, right? We're not exaggerating. That's all you need to know, right? So I thought, okay, so I'm doing something wrong. If it's that easy to use and people are not using it, then there must be something wrong. And that's when I started talking to people who really understand the brain and neuroscientists and things like that. And somebody said to me something really interesting. They said, I think the problem is that it's not about the tool, it's about our behavior, right? And so and I was like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, for example, if you're trying to get somebody in shape, right? There's 2 ways you could do it. You could build somebody a $5 million state-of-the-art gym, right? And say, here, for your office, you can have all this. That should get somebody into shape, right? Because it gives you all the tools you need. Or you could give them a personal trainer every morning, right? A personal trainer who does, by the way, very little other than say, come on, Abby, you got to run. Are you going to run or are you not going to run? That's it, right? That shouldn't work well. Do you know what I mean? And yet, the people who get into shape are not the people who have the state-of-the-art gym. It's the people who are working with a trainer every day. Why is that? Because it's not about the tool, it's about the brain, it's about our behavior. One other example on that, who buys treadmills, right? People who buy treadmills are people, it's not world-class runners who just want to run around the clock. It's people who want to, beach season is coming up, you want to get into better shape or you want to get healthier. And the treadmill arrives and you're like, I'm going to run every day. And then you get on that thing, or I get on it, and my brain is like, I don't want to run, and you get off but you have a treadmill. It's about the brain and behavior. So that made me change the whole framework of teaching this away from what the tool is and into how we operate as people. And so usually I'm teaching in a corporate setting, so I would teach it like, how do you work? So real quickly, the framework is sort of like, start with like learn. So it's only 3 parts. It's the learn, execute, and strategize. I can tell you in 2 seconds. The learning part is really, if you're in work or just in life and there's things that people say all the time, but you don't really know what they mean, and this now gives you no excuse to not know what a term is in work, in life, anything, right? So if somebody's always saying, oh, well, we got to do, AGI, whatever, just ask ChatGPT what that is. And if you don't get it then, say, can you explain it to me like I'm a 15-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old? And now I don't really get that. Explain it in golf terms, until you absolutely get it, right? So that's number 1. We like to learn things. Now that has a big implication in work, because the better you know things, the better you're going to make decisions, because you'll be able to weigh the 2 things, because sometimes you'll know what one thing is but not really know what the other thing is. So your cognitive bias kind of leans toward the thing that you know better. This should take that away, because now you're going to understand both things. It's also amazing with communication. Something that I do with companies is like, let's say that you're pitching a product, so whatever it is, and so the one that I was using was a lot in healthcare, and it's like, pitch this concept of value-based healthcare to a hospital executive, an insurance executive, and a patient, because for all of them it's going to be very different. You know what I mean? Like, why you're in the same way, if you're selling a product, I'm going to sell it much different to you than I might to a kid or somebody in Africa, or like, you have to understand when you're trying to convince somebody or sell something who you're talking to. ChatGPT is phenomenal at that. It's phenomenal at understanding how different people think. So if you said, hey, create a group of, and name it sort of like, 25-year-old Filipina women who all live in Harlem, it will create this group that sounds absolutely authentic. It's just outstanding at that. So that's the first part of the framework, is learning and really kind of like communicating. The second part, I'll say it really quick, is executing. It's just doing your day-to-day things. Write an email, blah, blah, summarize this article, like give me insights to this, write a new email, write a white paper on this, right? It's just your flow of work. Write job descriptions, give me the job descriptions, write it up for HR, write a, or in education, as we were talking about, write a whole lesson plan for ancient history. It just does it like that. And then the third part is strategizing, and just real quick on that, is it's for the big things, right? If you say, hey, I really want to solve this giant problem in my life. If you just say that, it's not going to give you a very good answer. It will give you something very, very generic. Like, hey, the example sometimes I give is like, I want to start a telecom company. ChatGPT, by the way, is always like, you sure? Because that's hard. I'm like, I am sure. It's like, okay, and it'll say like, okay, Conor, you're going to need a business plan, you're going to need marketing, and you're going to need people. I'm like, yeah, what? Like, it's so dumb, right? All of a sudden it turns into this total idiotic, simple, basic answer. And that's because you've asked it a question that's so big that it doesn't know where to start. So what you do is then you sort of like just kind of keep on digging deeper. It's like, tell me about the marketing. Okay, well, here's some plans. Tell me about that part of the plan. Okay, well, here's the thing. Tell me about that. And so you keep going deeper. So that's very quickly on sort of this 3-part framework. But could I say one other thing on all that?
Yes.
Thank you. She said, if you get bored, tell Abby. You tell Abby. Here's why it's so hard to use. And I don't mean hard to use, because the way Abby and I are talking about it is all you have to do is talk like a human. Well, duh, right. If you can do that, great, go to it. But when people say, well, how are you using it? Here's why I think it's hard. If you went like back in time or something like that, and when people lived with candles or whatever, I don't know what age that is. But anyway, and you brought like a light bulb to people would be like, this is amazing. This light bulb is incredible. Like, now I can like read at night, I can work later, I can, put my kids to bed. Like, a light bulb is unbelievably practical. It's unbelievably practical, right? And everybody would praise you to high heaven, and you'd be, you'd just be seen as like, the best human that's ever lived. That's a light bulb, right? So imagine now you go back to that era or whatever in like a month and say, okay, I have something better. I have something better than a light bulb. People are like, can't wait. What's going to be better than the light bulb? Because this is magic. And you say, I have electricity. And people are like, that sounds amazing. Yes, we want that. And they'd be like, so how do you use that? Well, that's the question, right? What would you say? What would you say to how do you use electricity? I would posit that the answer to that is, well, what do you need to do, right? So like, because if you say, oh, you get to heat your house, and then you're talking to somebody in Saudi Arabia, people are like, I don't need to heat my house. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're like, okay, so if like you need to heat your house, you can heat your house. If you need to cool your house, you can cool your house. If you need to sort of like use it for, powering motors or powering assembly lines or flying a plane, electricity is all about powering, making your voice louder, like this is through electricity. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on you. You can't just say, light bulb, what do you use a light bulb for? To make things brighter. Right, okay, so a light bulb, what does it replace? It replaces the candle. Right. What does electricity replace? And yet we use it every day, right? You guys are using electricity nonstop. You're going to drive here and home on electricity. You're going to, flip on your garage door is going to open automatically because of electricity. You're hearing me because of electricity. And yet, so when people say, how do you use electricity? It's like saying, how do you use ChatGPT? Here's why, because usually artificial intelligence is wrapped up in your iPhone. It's like in the spell check, it tells you exactly how to use this artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is all around us. Again, like spell check on your iPhone, that's artificial intelligence. But you know exactly how to use it because it's telling you how to use it. You've misspelled rhythm. Hardest word to spell. Rhythm? Come on. Anyway, point being that like it's going to give you that red squiggly line or it's going to change it for you automatically, whatever it is. Generative AI, what essentially you're doing, and then I promise I'm going to stop talking. I promise. We're going to hear from it. It's like ripping the user interface off the thing, right? It's like, okay, here you go. Here's the electricity. That's why it's a little hard. So when you start thinking, how should I use this thing? Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. What are you doing? Like, what do you need to do? Try it. Why kids are so good at this? Here's why kids are so good at this. Because kids aren't afraid to, you've probably seen this a ton. Kids are not afraid to ask, I wonder if it can do this. I wonder if it can, you know what I mean? Like they're amazing at it. Like, you teach my son Finn, like, and Lucy and these kids, like, they're all just like, I wonder if I could do this. And they produce the most amazing things because they're just like, let's try. So, I'm not saying go home tonight and do this or anything, but go on there and just think, well, what am I just trying to do? So let's say I promised I would stop talking. Can I say one more thing? One more thing, promise. Let's say you're like, well, I'm not using ChatGPT, I'm trying to plant flowers. Ask it. Say, I live in, Fairfield County, Connecticut. I want to plant flowers. It's September 26th, 27th, whatever it is. Here's like the weather. Here's about like, whatever. What kind of flowers will like grow amazing? It will tell you. It will tell you how to plant it. It will tell you everything. It'll tell you, describe it so you can buy it from Home Depot or the florist or whatever. You wouldn't think you're going to use generative AI to plant flowers. But that's when I did install these lampposts. Ask it. I got to install these lampposts. Or even, and I use this, I'm not, sort of be vulnerable for a second. Like, I've also used it, like, if I'm kind of feeling down or something like that, I'm like, hey, could you be in the voice of Tony Robbins and tell me why I'm going to crush this day? It's like, hey, Connor, you're going to, like, you say, or you know what, be Abraham Lincoln, inspire me. Connor, Forrest, do you know what I mean? Like, it's incredible. It can mimic any person in history. Abby, sorry, you go. Don't encourage me.
Connor, that's all great and very exciting, but can we get back to the doom and gloom for a moment? When I said the end of student thinking and the end of student writing, I saw like 6 people look me in the eye and give me that knowing head nod. So one of the questions I'm really wrestling with, as been teaching for the last 20 years. I'm a history teacher. I think writing is important. I love coaching students on how to package their ideas in a persuasive way. I think it's a tool for critical thinking. Is the teaching of writing going away? What do you think?
It's actually a really good question. I'm not sure. I don't think so. So I'm a writer, clearly Ab is a writer. And so we would love to say, no. So, and I actually don't think it's going away, but I do think it's changing, don't you? Right? So, and why is that? It's because it's hard to just assign writing to people and send them home and have them do it when they have this machine, undetectable, that's going to do it for them. So what does that tell us? And I want your opinion on this now because you'll probably know better than me. Maybe it tells us something like, when faculty at NYU ask me like, well, what are we supposed to do? I'm like, well, maybe that wasn't a good way to test people's knowledge anyway. Like if it could be solved like this, maybe that's not the right way to test people's knowledge. Now writing is a little bit different. I do think that there will be a certain element of, the calculator problem, which is you don't really need to understand how to multiply in your head anymore, right? It's just not a skill that we think is important. And I probably you too, really think writing is very important for communication and everything else. But like, is it going to be the same? I don't know. So on education, there is absolutely no easy answer. The only thing I will say, and I want to turn it over to Abby because she was talking about some really cool things. In as much as we say, well, students can now they can now cheat, or they can sort of like just have writing done automatically, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but that same technology that allows them to sort of like put on their, super, like their Superman cape and whatever, teachers have that as well. And it's an incredible tool to sort of get really creative with how to teach, right? Isn't that what you have been sort of like finding as well?
Aside from using ChatGPT to write about squids, we also have been using it a lot to bolster ideas that we're learning in class. So I teach about the ancient world. Right now we're studying Mesopotamia, the ancient Sumerians, which is ancient Iraq and surrounding areas. And sometimes, as you might imagine, it's hard to pull students in and get them interested in things that happened 4,000 years ago. So if I know a student is really into basketball or shoes or fill in the blank, I want to create a lesson plan that uses that interest to hook them and draw them in. And I have 12 students in a class, and they all have such divergent interests. So when I'm out of ideas, when I'm stuck, when I really want something that reinforces what we've learned in a personalized way, I might say something like, write me a 3-paragraph article at a 9th grade level about the symbolic importance of ziggurats for a student that is obsessed with the MBA or whatever. And the analogies that it will use, the similes that it will use, it really uses that individualized preference and that automatic interest to pull kids into the ancient world. So one thing, that I've noticed in 20 years of teaching is textbooks, especially for 9th grade ancient world, are lacking. They're either written at a level that is way too high, or they're written at a level that is below their grade level. So this has been one way to make supplementary readings that are fun and interesting and engaging and appealing, and also ensure that every student's need is being met. And then I can do one better than that. What about a student with a learning difference? Write this article for a student that has dyslexia. Write this article for a student that has dysgraphia. Write this article for whatever learning difference that student has. It's personalized. It's, of course, we get the article and we don't just give it to the student. We look at it, we vet it, we make sure it's valuable and moves the student forward with our large base of knowledge we're already working with. But it's a fantastic starting point. It's a way to shake things up. Yep. It's a way to pull every kid in so they feel like they're seen and heard and valued and part of that community, because I'm not just speaking about Mesopotamia, I'm also speaking about their language, or speaking of their language as well. So that's one of the ways that we use it.
So this is my son's ancient history teacher. That's the best thing of all time. This is what I love about St. Luke's, because the school has grabbed the bull by the horns, and they're like, we don't have to just play defense on this. Do you know what I mean? So when I went and talked to St. Luke's, I was talking to all these teachers and yeah, this is how I'm using it. This is how I'm using it. And they were just like, or if you had ideas, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that is why we send our kids. This is not a promo for St. Luke's. It's okay, 10% off to it, but truly, it's a remarkable place. Not because it's, the teachers are great. They've all been great, all that kind of stuff. But because they're looking at this and their first instinct is, all of our first instinct, mine too, was oh my gosh, my kids are going to cheat like crazy. But their first instinct is they're using it. How do we use that? And fighting against the tide of, well, this is a young person's thing. It is not. It is not. But here's the other thing that Abby's talking about too. And I would show this to you, but it would only take minutes. Let's say you had 30 kids in your class and you were teaching cellular biology. What I would do, for example, is literally ask every kid, what's your favorite thing, right? You're probably gonna get 12 Taylor Swifts in there, but you'll have Taylor Swift or the Knicks or the Yankees or whatever, or I don't know, like fishing or whatever it is, right? You'll have a broad range, and just ask them all to write 3 sentences about what they are like obsessed with. And then in ChatGPT say, this is literally what I would say in what they call a prompt, how you sort of question it. I would just say, write a lesson plan, like a sort of a 4-page lesson plan on cellular biology. And then I would enter in all 30 answers, and it would write 30 different lesson plans faster than you can think. You think I'm exaggerating. It's like that. All about how it relates to it's like Taylor Swift is the nucleus, and if I knew anything else about Taylor Swift I would say it right now, but but so what I did, and I think I did this on I think I did this when we were there. I was like, one of the cool things that I do is I was like, okay, so I know cellular biology seems like it should be really interesting. I don't know if there's a biology teacher in here, by the way. I'm sure it really is interesting, but anyway, I would say create in in Marvel, like the Hulk, Iron Man, all that kind of stuff. Write a cinematic battle of, making the parts of the cell different Marvel characters, and have the viruses as the villains in the Marvel universe. And it is unbelievable. It's the villain Loki is kind of like the virus because it can shift. It really actually nails which character is which part of the cell. And then it literally writes you a battle scene. Tell me a kid that's not going to read a battle scene, a bespoke, unique battle scene that it's just created with Marvel characters, as opposed to a textbook. Not that there's anything wrong with textbooks, in case there's any textbook authors out there. But just it's just easier to read. It's easier to process. This is how we learn. And so to the point of, does it crush writing? It probably will, right? Let's be honest. It probably will change writing dramatically, except for people that really want to write. I'm a writer. You're a writer. We love writing. And there's a lot of people out there that still love writing. There's a lot of people who still want to do this, and ChatGPT is phenomenal at helping you brainstorm about writing, all that kind of stuff. What it actually does best of anything is, whatever you're good at, keep doing that and have ChatGPT help you on it. If you're not good at it, ask ChatGPT to help. So for me, because I'm a decent writer, I don't say, ChatGPT, write this. I write it, and then I say, hey, ChatGPT, where should I tighten this up? And it becomes a great editor, because how it writes wouldn't be necessarily what I would want to do.
Yeah, Connor, to that point, one of the best things about teaching is experimenting and playing games in class. And sometimes you orchestrate this humongous game or this simulation, a lot of moving parts, lots of characters, and you're not exactly sure how it's going to work the first time. So even though there's a lot of learning, there are a lot of mini train wrecks along the way. So one thing I like to do when I'm rolling out a brand new game, I think it's going to be awesome. I say something like, hey, I thought about this game. It helps students learn the symbolic importance of Mesopotamia and the intertwinement of government and religion in Sumer. Can you look and see where I might be missing something, or where students are going to be confused, or where instructions aren't clear, or and I'll say this, clearly going to be a train wreck in class. And it will pick up on that language and understand that's a euphemism for learning's not happening. Kids are confused. And it will catch a lot, not all, but that's still part of the fun of teaching. And it will help clean up that game before I roll it out for the first time. So I'm maximizing time with the students and doing a little bit less of the, oh, wait a second, everyone stop. Okay, stop, sit down, back up. So there's a lot of editing that can happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think what Abby's getting at here is, and this is what I love when we were working over at St. Luke's on all this too. It's like you said it in the beginning too. This is about human. You have to keep a human in the loop. All this is going to do is augment what you are good at. Do you know what I mean? So it's making you better in the same way electricity makes whatever you're trying to do better. You could cool your house by the shade, or you could do it by air conditioning. You could power this plane by pedaling or whatever, or you could sort of use a jet, right? So it's that, right? It makes it better. But in order to make something really good, it needs this kind of creativity. Even if you're asking it to, hey, help me brainstorm some ideas, you still need to sort of jump in there and be actually, tweak it so it's like this, tweak it so would you say that it's like a partnership with it, right?
That human connection. Let's talk about bias for a second. I know if you've been following this in the news, one of the criticisms about AI tools is sometimes there's a bias that shows up in some of the answers. So what are some examples of that bias we should be on the lookout for? Gender bias, racial bias, and what can we do as users of that tool to mitigate the effect?
Yeah, so to give you a sense, This has been in the news a little bit. It's just, it shows up a lot when you do image generation. So there's certain tools. It's now built into ChatGPT actually, but like you may have heard these names before, like Midjourney or DALL-E or something. But again, when you see these AI created images that look exactly like a human, or exactly so real you can't tell the difference, those are generated images, obviously. Here's the problem. If you say something like, okay, show me a group of 10 gang members, it's going to be all black men, almost for sure, right? And if you show, I'll tell you, I was trying to create images around, what was it? It was like a woman sort of like superhero, right? For this thing I was doing. It was impossible, unless I really worked at it, to not make that like an over-sexualized, picture of a woman superhero, right? It was just really like that. So, and again, sort of like anything that's even slightly coded, show me an inner city, blah, 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 right? So here's the thing about bias. You have to sort of like really, guide it to say, show me a, diverse group, or, you have to sort of like really guide it to what you want, number one. But number two, something about bias, the bias is not the fault of the AI, right? The bias is the fault of us, right? I mean, because all it's doing is looking at the whole body of work on the internet and saying, well, what do we see? Here's the other thing, like if you ask it for like leadership tips, right? Give me the top leadership tips of the 10 greatest CEOs of the last 50 years. Who are the greatest CEOs in history? White men. Why? Because that's who people hired to be CEOs, right? So you have to sort of account for that. If you want more diversity of perspective, say like, hey, can you give me a sense of like of some of the great Latino women leaders, and or diversify and sort of show me how you're. That's another thing, by the way. This just a paper just came out to say that if you tell ChatGPT to take a deep breath and think about this step by step, the answers are way, way better. I don't know why. Nobody knows why. It's just weird. But here's the thing: like if you sort of just ask it to sort of like show you how it's thinking about things, it will actually show you how it's thinking about things. So, but bias is built into this because bias is built into us, and it's up to us to sort of like fight it when you're talking to it, I think.
If we were doing this in a class, and the way you internalize this is you have to do something with the knowledge, so we should have like iPads under your chair to like run a prompt through. Let's do one more question and then open it up to Q&A. What about privacy? Can I put my credit card and social security number in this and see what happens?
What do you think? Definitely. No, you can't. No, right? So this is the big thing. It happens in business a lot. So I work a lot with healthcare. I work with banks and things like that. You have to be really careful. You should not put what they call proprietary data in there. And even the problem isn't even really that you're putting it in. So I think there's a sense that like if you put in your secret codes and you put it in there, it's like putting it on the table of the library outside and somebody can just grab it. It doesn't work like that. So if you have put in like your credit card information, it's okay. Nobody can get that out. It doesn't work like that. It's not trained like that. It's not like somebody can grab it back out. It's trained on how you have talked. So it just knows that credit cards now have numbers and you have reinforced that for it. However, it technically, yes, if you put in like information that you don't want, like social security, all that kind of stuff, it does go to OpenAI and people can technically see it. And then if God forbid hackers, kind of hack into your series of searches and questions on, they could see that. The much bigger problem is usually like in healthcare, if doctors put in patient information, that's illegal, HIPAA requirements, things like that. Like so, there's more of a legal issue around that. But do be careful about putting things in. Now, if you want to talk all about your kids or your family, just all that kind of stuff, go crazy. Like I tend to sort of like, I put everything in there. I won't put like social security, all that kind of stuff. But I'm the kind of person where if somebody says, hey, fill out this thing with your email address and you'll get this free thing. I'm like, all right, whatever. Some people like, it's really up to your own sense of how much private. Some people won't put their information in anywhere. I tend to be a little more trusting. So just be careful whether you're at, work or just whether you're sort of thinking about your own personal data. Just be careful. Now people will say, don't upload your home budget. It's incredible that you can upload your home budget like in a spreadsheet and it will help you like, okay, you can save here, you can save here, you might want to spend. It's really amazing at all of this stuff. We could spend hours talking about it. And some people will say, don't say that, but I'm like, what do I care if it knows how much I'm spending on oil every, what I mean? Like, I just don't care. So if you don't care, if like you don't care that somebody overhears you on the street or something like that saying this stuff, it's probably okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Jason.
you.